Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to focus my contribution to talk about the impact of local government cuts on tackling youth violence. Now, we know that early intervention and prevention is key, and we know that also a public health approach is key, and I will come back to these points later on in my contribution.
Point of order, Mr Perkins.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I apologise for interrupting my honourable friend, but I note there's not a single Member of Parliament on the other side of the chamber. I just wondered if the fire alarm had gone off. None of us over here had heard it.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his point of order. Of course, he knows that the occupation of the benches is not a matter for the chair, and indeed, the honourable gentleman who is temporarily not in his place is making it clear that he is in the chamber, and so is the Minister and the Whip and the Financial Secretary to the Treasury. But I take the honourable gentleman's point. I should say to the honourable gentleman and to the chamber that I've been a little more lenient than normal this afternoon about people on both sides of the chamber coming in and out of the chamber and being absent for rather longer than I would normally find acceptable, because this is a particularly busy week. There are a lot of delegated legislation committees going on. There are a lot of select committees sitting because the House didn't sit on Monday, it being Easter Monday. So I have been a little more lenient than normal, and that is one of the reasons why there are fewer people in the chamber than there might otherwise have been. But no one would like to give the impression to anybody watching that this has been anything other than a well-attended debate with people making serious speeches, and every single speech that I have heard has been made by members of this place who take their duties in their constituencies very seriously. Thank you. Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Again, I think the honourable member made a good point of order. You know, this is an incredibly important debate in talking about cuts to local authority. And actually, I would say that my contribution talking about the impact that this has had on youth violence is also extremely important. Now, after the Prime Minister's recent summit on serious violence, which we're still waiting to have a statement on that in this chamber, the government launched a consultation on a new legal duty on multi-agency working and tackling violence. Now, much of the words in this document are to be welcomed. However, local authorities are responsible for many of the services that the government sees as key to this multi-agency approach. But with cuts of nearly £16 billion to local government since 2010, and £165 million in Lewisham, these have left our public services at breaking point. And you can see why so many are sceptical about the government's multi-agency strategy. Now, like I said, there is a lot of promising language in the consultation, mentions of following the evidence, on focusing on the long term and working with and for communities. And there are examples of best practice and advice from the World Health Organization on violence reduction. And violence is not inevitable. And with the right approach, I truly believe that it is preventable. Now, obviously, we need departments working together, sharing data and generating long-term solutions. And we hear all the time that this is not just a police issue that they can tackle alone. So we do need a strategy that brings together schools, social services, housing, police, youth services and the voluntary sector. One that follows the evidence and brings communities with us. Indeed, we need that public health approach. But teachers and frontline NHS workers have expressed concerns about the proposed legal duty, and with fair reason. Over the last 9 years, austerity has taken its toll. The NHS is suffering the biggest funding squeeze in its history. School budgets have been cut by £1.7 billion since 2015, adding yet another responsibility onto the shoulders of our brilliant but overstretched teachers and NHS staff without further resources is unacceptable. Now, if we look at my own borough of Lewisham, we can see the immense pressure the council is already under. Since 2010, Lewisham has suffered cuts of over 60% to its budget. Local schools have lost out on over £25 million worth of funding since 2015, and 14 schools are facing a shortfall in their budget as a result. Food bank use has been rising year on year, and last year 7,000 families in Lewisham visited a food bank. Yes, 7,000 families visited a food bank. Lewisham is one of the most deprived local authorities in England and is in the top 20 for local authorities with the highest levels of child poverty. At the same time, the local population has risen by 10% since the last census, adding yet another pressure to council's dwindling budget. This is the context we are talking about. Poverty rising, complex social needs rising, the local population rising, alongside unsustainable cuts to local services. Now, the government's public health approach says we should be bringing together law enforcement, education, health, housing and youth services. And councils want to do this, but they need the funding to achieve it. In Lewisham, youth services in the borough have been cut by more than a third since 2012. As a result, centres are struggling to remain open, and the year-round provision that we had in the past is just no longer possible. On police, who are working hard with less resources, often putting themselves in danger to make sure that they keep us safe. And in South East London, Lewisham, Greenwich and Bexley police forces have recently had to merge, resulting in a loss of 100 police officers. At the same time, we have lost several local police stations and more at risk of closing soon, and something I know the police would prefer was not happening. Now, councils like Lewisham have had to be creative so they can still deliver for local residents. Put simply, we previously had a service with 45 local community wardens, and now we have 30 seeking to do the same job, and this is on top of reductions to PCSOs. Now, in the past, we had more than 6 community support officers per ward who knew the local area well and had the capacity to build relationships with the community. And this is no longer possible. Most wards are left with just 1 community officer, and it's a picture that we are seeing across London. And it's a familiar story in our schools. On average, Lewisham schools will suffer an estimated loss of nearly £26 billion between 2015 and 2020, and that's equivalent to £319 per pupil. And most teachers are now teaching classes of well over 30 pupils. And schools' exclusions are rising too. And speaking of this, I've asked several times in this chamber, but when will we be getting the Tips's review into exclusions? Also, notably absent from the government's consultation is early years, and this is an worrying oversight, but not surprising. And Sure Start centres have been cut across the country, and Lewisham is no exception. In 2020, the borough had 19 children's centres, only 5 are left today. Early years support is crucial to a public health approach. How else can we implement early intervention? And isn't it time that the government provided maintained nursery schools with the sustainable funding they need to keep their doors open? Right, I want to end on a more positive note. We're lucky in Lewisham to have a Labour council led by a brilliant mayor. And in spite of all the cuts, Lewisham Labour is committed to implementing a public health approach to tackle violence, and they are planning on leading a truly community-led approach and have already started by consulting with Lewisham's vibrant community groups and voluntary organisations. Our local government has a huge part to play in tackling violence, and it's reassuring that the government has recognised this. The government is currently using all of the right language, but now is a time to follow through with the necessary funding that our service has been without for far too long. And if I just finish with one final remark. You know, we talk about following the evidence, you know, but where is the evidence that when a programme is run in a school where kids are taught don't go and carry a knife because you're not going to be safe, that actually works. If we want to talk about true evidence, we want to build our young people to be resilient, to realise how fantastic they're going to be in the future and to have the skills to be able to do that. And that is investing in Sure Start, early childhood centres. That is investing in our schools, and that is investing in youth work. Our young people deserve this. They deserve to have the futures we all want for them. And I would urge the government to make sure that they properly fund local authorities to make sure that they can deliver on this.